Good morning, George. Good morning, Crystal.
I was just talking to Kim a few minutes ago. She's anxiously getting ready, so
Okay.
she should be here shortly.
All right. Sounds good.
Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning, Crystal. How was your weekend?
Great.
Did you get any gardening done?
Yes, I did.
And there's Kim now.
Hey, Kim. How are you?
Good. How are you now that I know how to unmute?
Zoom is always fun, or rather, it's always fun to figure out all these different virtual connection tools.
Right. You know, none of them, WebEx, Citrix, Zoom, Teams, GoToMeeting, whatever. They're all just different enough that you get caught up. Hey, Tom, you're on mute. There you go.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Crystal.
Hello, Kim. Aside from this, I'm looking forward to your presentation for Access Europe.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, and also looking forward to absorb any pearls Tom has to give us.
Great. Good.
The pressure.
Welcome, everyone. My name's Maria Barnes, and I'm the chapter president of Access Lunchtime. And today we have two people with us. We have Tom Van Stiphout, who is the software development manager of Kinetic
IT.
He's located in Phoenix, Arizona. And we also have Kim Young, who is an independent developer and the founder of Access All Stars in the Chicago area.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And both of them, as well as George Hepworth, who is also on this call, have been part of a group that have generously volunteered much of their time in revamping the old, outdated Northwind database, and they've actually made two versions now, and a developer version and a starter version, I believe they're called. And in particular, Tom and Kim are going to talk today about the developer version and give you a little bit of insight into it. So go ahead and take it away, Tom.
Right, I will. Thank you very much for that introduction. That is indeed true. About 16 months ago, we got started with this project. We have a core working group of 5 people, including my co-presenter Kim, as well as George Hepworth and George Young, and Dawn was there
Taylor.
as well, Taylor, and she is actually now working with me on the commercial project. Very interestingly, I didn't know her before this project. We started working on a new version of the templates, and we actually, in the process of trying to define the scope of work, found out that we needed 2 templates. Today we'll be focusing on a few aspects of the developer template. We want to take you through some of the core functionality of it related to orders and purchase orders. And in the process of that, we'll point out a number of things that might be of interest to you, and perhaps you would apply to your own projects. Certainly, this version of Northwind templates has been designed from the ground up using best practices as we could discern them and have used them in our own practice. And there's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of inline documentation in the code. There's a lot of good database design and forms design, interesting things for you guys to look at. So we want to get started with that application. And just to give you the startup experience for a moment, you will just find the templates in the file new, like always. I'm not going to actually download it now. I'm actually going to show you what is the current version as we are tweaking it just a little bit, and there will be a slipstream release at some point. You get a welcome screen. The video is very well worth watching. And after that, you get the login experience. If this is your first time, we will ask you for your name so that we can add you as an employee of Northwind. And then we get the main application with a number of new things that are firsts for any templates, such as a ribbon. The orders form opens just like the old Northwind. We also have the custom navigation set up. Of course, by object type is also available, just like always. And since we want to take you through an example of orders and purchase orders, we are now, you have to think of it at the starting point of Northwind. They're starting to open their doors and they haven't sold anything yet. If I go to all orders, we can see that there are 0 orders here. If I go to purchase orders in a moment, you'll see the same thing. The reason we do that is because you can think of it as too much information. If we were to give you 50 orders that have all kinds of things ordered, several purchase orders that purchase all kinds of products, it's hard to keep track of what exactly is going on. So let's say you're a tester. You would probably want to start with the simplest scenario possible, and that's what we're looking at. So 0 orders, 0 purchase orders, a bunch of products. All of them have no stock, all the zeros here, nothing allocated, nothing available to sell. Our shelves are completely empty. And the phone rings. So we are going to take an order. We're going to take a very simple order. We do have a couple of customers in here just to shortcut that part of the presentation.
So I'm going to interrupt you a minute. Russ, you made a comment. Are you talking about your own downloaded copy, or you're talking about what you are viewing right now? He's saying that he's not seeing the DB on the intro screen.
Yeah, what I'm viewing right now. Can you hear me okay, Mary?
Yes, but I can see what Tom is showing. It says Northwind Traders Developer Edition 2.2.
Okay. Maybe
If you can't see that, you might try exiting Zoom and coming back in.
Okay, I will do that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure and clarify. Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yep.
So we are going to continue creating the very first order. This is the customer who called in. The employee is going to be filled in. The order date is today. And a few other things like the current tax rate are filled in. This is very much like Northwind 1. And we are going to pick elements, just as an example of dried fruits. Elements, a quantity of 10. And just to keep it simple, we're going to say that's all we need for this order. And immediately what we can see here is that the status is no stock. And it's like, duh, we haven't purchased anything yet. We've just shown you that our shelves are empty. So if we try to create an invoice, it will look at that and say, you can't really invoice until all the line items have a status of allocated. Fortunately, it also says allocation happens automatically when a PO is received with sufficient quantity. So if we were to buy 10 elements and receive that, something will happen. And we'll go into that. So at this point, we're kind of stuck here with this order. So we thank the customer for their order. And we'll turn around and go into purchase orders. We've already seen we have no purchase orders. And we're going to create one. Is that what we want to do, Kim, or do we want to create a second order first?
I think this is fine.
So we have a couple of vendors set up. Let's use the Brown vendor company. And let's order some product. They sell almonds. The quantity comes in at 30. We will point out in a moment why that is. Actually, maybe I'll jump into that right now. We have a product of almonds. We have a reorder level of 30. So that means that anytime we place an order that is, actually this is a calculated value, right? The minimum reorder quantity is 5, but we've calculated, since we've already sold 10, we have a target level of 20. Can you see that math? So we have a target level of 20, which means we really want 20 on the shelf. We have just sold 10. So that means that our calculated reorder level is 30. If we order 30, we can give this customer 10. We have 20 on the shelves. Our life is good. So we are going to create a purchase order for just the 30. And when we do that, we can submit it. And the status has now been changed from new to submitted. What we see here is workflow, right? A purchase order goes through several steps. The second, this is now dimmed out. This has been completed. We can now try to approve this purchase order, because every purchase order needs to be approved by someone with the rights to do that, and I don't have that right. So it gives you a tip. You can say either you log in as someone who does, like Andrew, or you give yourself some rights. Of course, in a real-world application, you would not be able to promote your own security level, but this is not a real-world application. So you can indeed go in and say, Mr. Tom has purchase approvals rights. Nice. Now we can approve. Now let's peek at what's happening to our order. So our order is still listed here as no stock. I open it just to make sure. Now the status here has changed to on order, because we've just placed that PO. When we try to create an invoice, it still said, because we are not in a status of allocated. We go from new to on order to allocated. Allocated per our business rules. Other companies may do this differently, but in Northwind, we have to wait until we actually physically receive that PO. So let's go back to the PO itself. And let's see if we can move that one forward. Oh, sorry. Open the PO again. We can see it's been submitted, it's been approved, and now a truck shows up with the stuff. So we receive that into inventory. And the question is, do you have everything here? Are the 30 here? And are you ready to post this to inventory? Orders waiting for these products will be updated. That's what we want to see happen, so that our order can now be fulfilled. Yes. We're now in a received status. So as we go back to the orders and open that order back up, allocated. So what has happened is the 30 were received. We then look around and say, are there any orders that need almonds? Yes, there is one. Do we have enough on hand? Yes, we do. All right. Set the status to allocated. So now those 10 have been allocated to this order. And if we go to the purchase, if we go to the product screen, and we look at that same row as before for almonds, we can see that 10 are allocated now. and 20 are available to sell. Remember, we received 30. We allocated the 10 to the order, and we have 20 more to sell. They are sitting on the shelf. This line is yellow because 20 is below the reorder line. So it's still like, hey, you should order some more because we're below where we want to be. So our order is now in allocated status, and that means that we can create the invoice. Previously, it would say, sorry, can't do it. If we had additional line items, you would still get that message, but in this case, it will say, well, you still can do it for another different reason. We charge shipping. So now we can create the order. The shipping is on there. The line item, in this case, single line item is on there. That's our invoice report that we could email to the customer. This little section from print, this reports options section, group technically, is dynamically shown and hidden depending on whether a report is active or not. If we go to other sections, then I'm actually surprised. That might be a bug. It didn't hide. If we close the report, certainly that collapses. So back to our order. So we have created the invoice, and in our workflow, we now are ready to ship. We don't wait. Again, per Northwind rules, we don't have a need to receive payment. That comes later. In some companies, it will be the reverse, right? You pay first, then we'll ship it. Not in Northwind. You get additional validation. We'll talk about that in a next presentation. So again, 5:30, I believe, today. Yes. And the shipper is the Blue Shipping Company. So now we can ship the order. The status is now shipped. After that, customer receives it, sends us a check, whatever. Same thing happens. They send a check. And it happened on the same day. Oops, 5. The status is now paid. And once the boss looks it over and says, yep, that's all good, customer is happy, we can close the order. In this case, I'll say no so that it remains on our list of active orders for a moment, which we close and reopen that, it will refresh and says we are shipped. Okay, and the status is paid.
So let me interrupt for a second. So we just had a question about partial payments. Northwind doesn't accept partial payments. And we are going to have a meeting on Wednesday with Colin's group, the Europe group. And we're going to talk about other changes you could make to this existing template to enhance and provide other features. Partial payments, splitting orders. There's a long list of what we'll go through. Those are not the Northwind business rules that you see here. So we're following Northwind's rules.
Exactly.
That's Kim talking. Yeah. Okay.
So, Kim, would you like to continue and point out the inventory module in VBA?
Sure. Let's look at the product form first, the product detail for almonds or one of them. So the information that comes from the inventory module is listed on the lower left right section where it says quantity available to sell, 20. We know we have 20. We ordered 30. We've already sold 10. That means we have 20 left. How much no stock? So how many orders do we have sitting out there where there's no stock available? How much have we already allocated to other orders? how much has been ordered, but we haven't received it yet, and what is the minimum quantity to reorder. Those all come from a VBA module that we have, which, Tom, you could find under VBA, and we can look at it real quick because we're going to go into this in much greater detail with Colin's group, because it's hard to do the whole application in 1 hour. Maria saw a couple of our early whirlwind tours trying to show you a little bit of everything, and we didn't really have time to explain any of it. So a good practice, as always, with inventory or any sort of calculations, is that a calculation is done in one place and one place only. You want the rules to be followed. You need to make sure that everybody's following them, and the only way you can do that without having to search through the code all the time is to control your calculations. So what we have are a number of calculations here. Allocate to inventory. We look at a product, we say, what do we have on hand, and let's allocate what we can, and we'll show you some of the differences that occur with that. One of the Northwind rules is first come, first serve, meaning the first orders received for a product, we try to fill those first. So, first one in wins. But sometimes we may not have everything the customer wants, but we still allocate what we can to that order. We do not split orders. We don't ship in multiple groups. We don't split because I can send you 15 almonds now. I'll send you 15. And if you're waiting for another 10, I'll send you those in another order. We actually change the order. So those are our business rules. And I didn't say this, and I normally do. So I am a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and I also have a certificate in production and inventory control. And what I can tell you is if a customer came to me today and said, oh, of course the phone rings when you're doing a demo. If a customer came to me and said, I want you to help me and build an inventory system, I would say, great. I'm going to help you gather all your requirements. We're going to put together your use cases. And then I'm going to find a product, and I'm going to help you evaluate it, and you're going to buy that product. Inventory is extremely complicated. It has so many variations and flavors. There are companies who have spent decades creating inventory applications. They've been through all those scenarios. They will be able to handle scenarios that come up in the front. George Hepworth is on this meeting with us. He's got a special little app we're going to show at Colin's group where he's actually barcode scanning stock takes, which is part of our concept here. What if you order and it comes 10 in a package, but there's only 9 in a package? What if, do you buy it packaged and then you split it up and sell it? How do you figure out your cost? This is very complicated. So there's no way we could have provided you a single, this is inventory, and if you take this, you can go do it module. We just couldn't. There are too many complications. What we could do, though, was create this module, set up our business rules, and enforce them strictly throughout our application. So that's what we've chosen to do here. You can look, we've commented how each calculation works. Tom, if you want to scroll through that a little bit. This is our biggest one. One of the things we should point out, there was a lot of, what are all those numbers? 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Those are line numbers. They show up when errors happen, and they say at line 50, and you get an error back, and you go, well, where's line 50? How do I get line 50? Access doesn't naturally do this, but there is code available on the web with Tom. I think you're more familiar with the link than I am that will help you add and remove those line numbers.
Oh yeah, here in mod startup, I'm giving you a note. The VBA code uses line numbers, so the error handler can report on which line the error occurred. We'll talk about error handlers also in a future presentation. If you want to remove them, we cannot actually give you a link, but we can give you a hint that says, if you search for that particular phrase you can find code that goes through your VBA and removes the line number or adds them back in if you want.
Right. So one of the other things that we didn't say here, Tom, because we've said it so many times, I think we forget. So we deployed this through Microsoft. So we cannot have links to help articles that do not belong to Microsoft. We cannot put links in for you to get code that doesn't belong to Microsoft. Some people had some comments about the fact that we embedded images. We have a really great report in this application called the Fall Catalog. We could not deploy images to you because everything had to be deployed within the database because it comes out as part of the ACCDT and that gets uncompiled and that's how you get the template. So we couldn't give you a bunch of extra text files or images. Everything had to be contained within the database. So with that being said, we adhered to our rules strictly, and as we scroll through, we explained to you why we made the choices we made. A lot of what was in the first Northwind, you know that the developers chose to do something, but you didn't really know why they made that choice. We also provide a lot in the code around other alternative syntax you could have used, another way to do something. Here we're explaining how much do we have to sell. Here's our definition, and then here's how we did the calculation. And that is consistent throughout the application, and this is the code that is called from everywhere that has anything to do with inventory. So the orders, purchase orders, sales numbers that you see for customers, other things like that, all come through all of these. So we use the concept of a stock take, which started with Alan Brown, and he gave special permission for us to utilize his code. So the concept of a stock take says you go to into the warehouse or wherever you have your items and you physically count how many are on the shelf, in the bin, however you happen to store it. And date and time will matter when you took the count, because if usually, or I shouldn't say usually because it really isn't usually anymore, a lot of the time a warehouse will get shut down in order to take the counts, because sometimes something is in the wrong bin and someone has to move it over and you need to count it. So it's not a real-time sort of counting situation. So we have no stock takes here. George is going to show you how that happens with his little app that he did as an extra. Here's our customer's order. We can look at purchase orders that have been filled for that. Where are they at? What status are they in? All of this revolves around the inventory modules.
Right.
So Tom, is there anything else I didn't remember to say?
I believe you covered everything that we wanted to cover here.
Okay, great.
We can, I think, at this point, pause to see if there's any questions about this section, and then we could move on to another topic.
Does anyone have any questions for us so far?
So if you have a question, you can come off mute to ask the question, or you can put it in chat. I did ask one question in chat that is not related to Jeff's questions, which I think you answered, that there'll be more information on that in Colin's session. I asked about the status on the purchase order and whether or not it was computed at all, or whether it's always just a value and then you're changing that value, like when it was not allocated yet, how did it go to allocated? Was it something you did from the actual product order?
Yeah. So when we are in a purchase order and we get to the receive status, in this case, we're receiving 30 elements, then indeed a calculation runs. That was the VBA code that I had up for a moment. We can return to that, which will then look at all the orders that are not fulfilled, that have a status of on order or no stock, and will then say, Are you waiting for elements? Yes, for 10. Do we have 10 available at least? Yes, we do. Okay, then you can have them. And you can have them means we're changing the status from no stock or on order to allocated. So you have now received the 10 elements and you can then continue in your workflow. Such
So
as
does something similar happen when you're ordering something, that it goes from no stock to on order?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yes, that did actually happen with this order. I didn't point it out to you so clearly. That did indeed happen. Yes.
So it all happens through the inventory module, and it's called allocate inventory. So an event happens within the database that causes the allocate inventory calculation to occur, and both the purchase orders and existing orders that are open or unfulfilled are looked at. And it happens because we get a purchase order and we receive it, or we've approved it, and then it goes to on order, and then we look at all of the orders that said no stock and we move them to on order if their requests will be covered by that order. And this round robin goes on through the purchase orders. When they get received, something else which can change this allocation occurs if an existing order which has not been filled gets changed. So let's say, oh, Tom, do we want to put in a couple of other orders for almonds?
I think looking at the clock, we should probably say that we don't want to delve into
Okay. Oh, you're right.
details of inventory, but that is a teaser for what is coming up in the next presentation, where we go into more depth into that. One thing that we can point out, I think, is I just clicked on that little help button that we have everywhere. And we have significant documentation with each of the sections. And this one doesn't have the inventory.
Using purchase orders does, I think.
Or is it under products?
Oh, could be in products. Right, products, sorry.
So when we go to our product and we click on the help page for that and look at probably programming, I would say. Learn more in the inventory section following this section. So as we scroll down here, here's a section about inventory. And as Kim pointed out, so important that you define your business rules and say, hey, I don't care how other companies organize their inventory. This is the Northwind way. If your company is doing it differently, then these rules will, of course, be different, and that will have an effect on the VBA code. But this is all that we can share with you today, that you can read for yourself and or join next week's meeting. Okay? So we'll see if there's any other questions up to this point. Continue.
Hello,
with...
Tom.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Colin here. I did just put a question in 30 seconds ago. My session, which is next Wednesday, Maria, Wednesday the 7th of June, you're carrying on with the orders as a significant part of the session, excuse me. Are you assuming that people will have all watched this session or not?
We will briefly review it, but just like in this case, with this presentation, we kind of jumped into creating an order without pointing out a lot about, for example, the ribbon, what you can see there, some of the other aspects, general purpose aspects. We kind of gloss over that and move into the topic at hand. We will do the same thing with you. We will briefly recap, but it is not a prerequisite to read this.
Okay, thank
you. We can perhaps direct them on, if you feel like you missed some pre-discussion, feel free to, go here and the video will be posted soon and you can watch this one.
Totally. I didn't want to put pressure on your videographers.
Yeah, that's pretty quick.
Be ready.
I would suggest, though, that you point them to the dog video from the Denver area Access User Group, where we sort of did a comprehensive overview about the new app. We talked about starter and developer some so that concepts are available, because we really just, I'm hoping we end up with sort of a chronology of things you can watch and learn about in more in depth than we can possibly do in a single presentation.
Okay, Kim, if you happen to have a link to that and you could post it in the chat for
let
this
me find
audience
that
as well, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, let me go find that while Tom moves.
Yep.
Just before Tom goes in, I think because the DevCon video is also publicly available to all, I think that's worth watching too.
Correct. Yes, it is.
I'll find that one link. Thanks.
Yeah, Colin, if you have it, you can paste it in the chat.
The dog or the DevCon?
I think she meant DevCon.
Okay, I'll do that in a few minutes. I'm just putting down the date of my session and a link to the webpage for that as well.
Okay. I'm going to move on to...
There was one other question here.
Of course.
Came in late. Whether or not the inventory module includes location within the warehouse.
It does not.
Okay, so not at this time.
That is one of the many limitations. You are looking essentially at an inventory record here. There's nothing about location on this page. Bin number, the ability to print a barcode that you're going to paste on the bin so that you can shoot it with your barcode reader. None of that exists. And the big reason for that was we're not trying to build an application for a real world company. We are trying to introduce you to some concept that you can take forward. I want to talk a little bit more about the validation that you already saw in action. And let's just start here. If I create a new order and I only fill in some notes, and yes, I did get some default fields filled out. If I try to save that, obviously an order without a customer doesn't make any sense. And what we do is we actually help you and color the fields that are that we are waiting for. And in this particular case, these are actually required fields. If you look in the underlying table, customer ID in the order table is a required field, and obviously, and so is tax status. The way we implement this kind of validation, this is one of the two kinds that we implement, is by looking at the underlying record set, record source, which in this case would be QRY order, something like that. And we look at all the fields that are present there and that are on the screen, and we look at whether they are required or not. And if they are required and not filled out, the value is null, then they get the yellow column. And as you then select and try again, then you are satisfying the required fields at least. And so we can move on and save that record. So there is code in form before update to make that happen. Also, there's form after update that then takes off the yellow color. It's no longer needed. If we just very quickly say that we want a brownie, and you already saw this, when we try to create the invoice, it says, oh, okay, in this case, okay, sorry. Let's set up the scenario with dried fruits. We know we have some elements. So we were able to allocate from inventory. If we try to create an invoice, then we get what we call conditional required. So this is not a required field, otherwise it would have been yellow a second ago. This is a field that is conditionally required. If we are trying to create an invoice, then it is a required field. Just like if we were to push this forward, if we try to ship an order, the ship date and shipper become required for payments, payment method, payment paid date become required. So that's the conditional required. Let's look at the code that is responsible for that. That would be in modValidation, where we have a couple of validation functions. So we have things like is valid form, validate form. That's one. That's the one. Validate form, pass in a form. So you can, this is very generic code, right? You can pass in your form object and say, I'm throwing a form at you. Is it, validated for me? And what it will do is it will cycle through the fields as I indicated before. And it will highlight the invalid controls if there are any. In yellow in our case. And let's look at that one. Actually, yeah, shift is 2. Shift function 15. So I said that we would be looking at if this is a required field, if this control is bound to a required field. Then it needs to be, and if the current value is null, then that's badness and we need to. And so if we go to this guy, let's go to definition, it's one line of code. The control in question, its parent is the form itself, right? Grab its record set clone, look at the fields collection, and in particular for the field pointed at by the control source of this control, something like order date or customer ID, and the required property thereof. So if this returns true, also note there is an on arrow resume next here. If this returns true, then it means that this is a control that's indeed bound to a required field. And then we can test if it is null. And then highlight. So really very little code, certainly not code that you would have to write, because you can borrow our modValidation, and you can just pass in your form reference. Actually, you will probably call validate form. For example, if we were in, actually, yeah, you can follow the bouncing ball. This is a top level public function that does the work. So that's validation in a nutshell. You might ask, well, how do you do that in a continuous forms? We can do it there too. We can have conditional, I'm kind of triggering an arrow now. We can have conditional formatting on columns to indicate whether a record is valid or not. This was not the best clean demo. But you can see, for example, if you were to leave quantity empty, that is a required field, then we set conditional formatting on that column, on that field, to make the background yellow. And we take it away once you satisfy the requirement. And we do that with the conditional formatting collection for each control. You can just add an item to that and say, make the background yellow. That code is in the same area that I just showed you a second ago. So that's validation. There are other types of validation that we are not doing. For example, I have an order here. This order is in the new tabs. This is a locked field, so that doesn't work. But there are certainly situations where you can enter a date that's illogical and get away with it. The invoice date can, of course, not be before the order date. We did not implement that. That is another type of validation that a professional application would really need to have, right? And it was, of course, a difficult decision for the Northwind team to make that trade-off between when are we going to ship this thing and how many features is it going to have. And this is one that didn't make it. But it's certainly something that you should be aware of, cognizant of. You know, a tax rate over 100%, it's probably possible to put that in, or minus 5%. Those kinds of what I might call a range validator just doesn't exist. It certainly does exist in my commercial projects, but not in Northwind. So gives you a little bit of an idea what you can do with validation and what is available in Northwind and what's left for you to think about. Next, I want to touch on cascading combo boxes. You already saw this in action. We have a category followed by a product. And obviously, when you look in a product definition, it will say this product lives under the category of dried fruit and nuts. If you look at the database design, products, product categories, right? One-to-many relationship. So the cascading combo box is really the way to go here when you are in an order and you want to first choose a category. It then shows you the products for that category. If you change your mind, the child combo box refreshes. Also, if you here's the validator, by the way. I didn't fill out quantity. It says bark. If you click this way and into elements again, now we see the list of dried fruits. If I click on beer, it needs to show the beers, the beverages, I should say. And there are a number of other scenarios. Cascading combo boxes is complicated in Access because there is no native support for it. I strongly believe that there is a way to do that, but alas, it doesn't exist today. So we have to do this ourselves. By the way, interesting, right? You cannot go into design view here. 10 points for someone who knows why that is. I'll tell you. We have the ability to open multiple orders. See that? Same form, two different records. And that takes away that ability because the forms are actually created in a little bit different way. So what we do is we go into our order detail form and look at it this way. Design view is still available there. And in particular, we're interested in this subform. So what we do here, there's a number of aspects, and there is a, I think, pretty decent help page on this. There's essentially 4 different elements to it, and I will just kind of whet your appetite. What you can see here is, lo and behold, there is a text box on top of the combo box. And the text box carries the name of the item for that row. And the name, so the name of the category and the name of the product. And the category dropdown is unbound. Why is that? That's because of proper database design. This row is fully identified if I tell you this is product ID number 5. I do not have to tell you, oh, by the way, that's category number 3. So category is not stored in the order line items table. So this has to be unbound, yet we need to be able to show the name. So you already see 2 of the items that you have to implement when you do cascading combo boxes. The parent has to be unbound typically because that ID does not get saved in the row. And you have to have overlapping text boxes. The third thing you have to do is each time you get focus, you need to requery this list. You saw me click from row to row and it showed you the correct items for that category. That only happens because of on got focus. We requery ourselves. And the query itself is also interesting because I call it, looks back at its parent. This is rather small for you guys perhaps, but it says here, form, exclamation point, CBO product categories. So it looks back at its parent and says, give me all the items for that category. So this is the value in that combo box. The combo box itself is unbound, but it still picks up that ID value of 2 or 3, whatever. And it shows you the list of those items. So again, if I close this for a moment and reopen one of the orders and we go to the help page, pretty much every forum has such an help page. And here's a section about cascading combo boxes. Four steps are necessary. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have a good implementation here. You have the documentation in front of you. You could look at one of your own forms and say, I wish I could do that too. And now I think by following this, you'd be able to do that. And if not, go to the forums where we hang out and ask a question. Say, hey, I'm struggling with Northwind. I'm trying to do this myself. I'm missing a step somewhere.
One of the things I'd like to add, Tom, because we just have a few minutes left, the team that did this, we did this as volunteers. We weren't paid because we wanted to give something back to everyone else. And if you work on Northwind 2 and you make changes and you learn something, please share it up on the forums with everyone else. We're hoping to kind of create community involvement around starting with this as a place to begin, make the changes you'd like to see, and then share it with others so everyone can learn from it. Yep. That's really our hope for all of this.
Yeah, and here are some of those forums, the Access Tech Community Forum, the Access Forum. I didn't even touch on the fact that we have, all these help topics here. I just opened the Learn forum here, which has these links at the bottom. Those are just two, use your own favorite forums. People will be able to respond and or route your questions to the team. Let's see, looking at the clock, we have to be careful and see if there is something that we want to talk about, maybe a little bit more about how we built that Northwind 2 application. For the longest time, we were working in the ACCDT format with the team. Each had its own responsibility, purchase orders, companies, etc., inventory, and the contributions were being integrated into the main, and then the main became, the starting point for the next round of work. And then at some point, several things have to happen. You cannot just turn over an ACCDT to Microsoft and say, can you post that for us? It doesn't quite work that way. There is a large group of people, I would say probably about 20 or so, that have actually contributed to the success of these two templates. And the few that I want to talk about in this context are the security team. The VBA needs to be reviewed. Certainly they wouldn't want us to add some hacky code somewhere that could potentially cause issues. and then also the accessibility team. We didn't even know that such a thing existed when the project started. But they go about how to build applications so that they can be used by the widest group of users, including people, for example, who have vision issues and cannot see contrast as well as other people. And so that led to a lengthy review and back and forth about font sizes, font colors, background colors. The difference between the foreground color and the background color had to be a certain value. There are tools available to help you identify that. And I can tell you that from this point forward, I will certainly build all my applications that way. It is at the end of the day, it's a small adjustments that you have to make. And it just means that both existing customers of yours, employees who use your applications, or future hires, or people who are being considered, I would like to hire this person, but they have vision issues, no problem, at least not from the perspective of these applications, which have been built with those kinds of things in mind. There's tab order, there's the ability for screen readers to look at your form and read it back to the user. All of those things don't really take that much time once you are aware of them and know what kind of things you have to tweak. And we certainly did that for Northwind. Then it came time to create the ACCDT, which is what in the end you are downloading. I thought that would be a very simple process. It turned out that we actually, because Northwind 2 is such a comprehensive product and so much more advanced than Northwind 1 or any of the other templates that Microsoft has ever built, that we actually exposed a few, you could call them bugs or limitations of the ACCDT process. One of them is if you download Northwind 2, the beautiful layout of the relationship diagram will not be what you see. Unfortunately, that is one of the limitations, is that this layout doesn't come across. You just get them all stacked on top of each other, and you'll have to lay it out yourself.
And we're hoping that one of the user groups is going to ask us to do a presentation on accessibility. So we haven't had that request yet, but if you're interested and you want it, reach out to your user group leaders and ask them to get it on the list, because it was fascinating. The tool is very easy to use, and the awareness that it brought to all of us about what to think about was very beneficial.
I'm happy to have you this fall on that topic.
You're on.
We'll talk later.
Yes. Oh boy. So with that, I think we've come to the end of today's presentation. We're happy to answer any further questions that there might be.
And Maria, can you provide us the text in the chat afterwards so that we can review everything and make notes in whatever we have going forward to try to cover some of the questions or topics we may have missed?
Yes, I will do that. There are several questions in the chat. There is a link here to the follow-up session for Access User Group for Wednesday, June 7th. I'm okay with sticking around for a while to try to answer a few of these questions if you're up for it.
I'm up for it.
I'm up for it.
We do have a comment from Ben S. asking you to please modify the template so the unit price field is in line with other fields on the row on the add order form.
Oh, I see it.
Aha,
You see
yeah.
how this box is a little too low?
Yep. They'll
I
add
see
that
it.
to their list.
I think
Harry,
that's another thing we should point out too, that we don't just get to decide to deploy a new template every 3 days. We have to go back to the Microsoft team and work with them. And everyone who helped us at Microsoft This was not on their project work for this year to be doing. So everyone was very gracious in terms of giving us their time, squeezing us in. We had people work with us on the weekends. It was really a really good experience.
So it might be a while, maybe next year before you get updates. Is that what you're
We're
saying?
hoping in about 3 months or so
Okay.
after the first launch. Yeah.
Okay. Harriet asked if there's validation on paid date. Not sure which form. Is that this form?
Yes, that's this form. So yes, if you are at the status where receive payment is the next thing, and you click on it, it will require, so it will turn yellow, these fields if you haven't filled them out.
I like how you've added like numbers in front of the field. So that's kind of which stage it's required for, right?
Correct.
Workflow stage. Very nice. Crystal has an issue with seeing the line numbers in the VBA code since it's both good and bad. And she would love to see a way that you could click on something maybe in the tools to remove them as opposed to just a comment that tells you how to go about finding that. Is that correct, Crystal?
Yeah.
Well, what I can say is we can't deploy anybody's code that isn't ours. We as a team had to meet with the Microsoft lawyers and sign off on documents that we would not come back to them. So any code donated by anyone outside of our project team, we cannot utilize. We all use MZ tools and they add them and subtract them. There are ways you can do it, but we cannot publish your code. We will have to rewrite or create our own code to make that happen.
Question from Philip. In the cascading combo box, how do you get the child element to automatically display? Let's see, there's new messages. He doesn't have a mic. He's asking if they're doing validation rules in the property design or have extra coding to do error checking. I'm not sure if that's the same question. I'm sorry. If you're not able to answer it because we don't have enough info, that's fine. If you're able to type more, Philip, maybe when you selected product category, a product was automatically displayed.
Yes. Good eyes. That is indeed true. It's perhaps not super clean that is indeed what is happening. I just chose the category and the first product for that category is automatically filled in, even though I did not select it. It would be slightly cleaner if this was still blank for me to select something. There is a reason for that. It is, I think, hinted at in the documentation I showed. But the main reason is that this is an unbound combo box with a text box on top of it. And that text box will not be populated until a row is actually created. And so when I come in here for the first time and I choose something from my combo box, unbound combo box, no row is being created yet, right? For the line items, because it's unbound. There's no event that creates a row. And that means that there is also not any way to show the text of the category in the text box that is overlaying it. So as soon as I were to tab out of it, the text box is going to be blank because there is no row yet if this were blank. I hope that makes sense. So the row is only being created when a bound field gets a value. And with the drop-down list for category, it is unbound, so no row exists yet. And then when I tab out of it, the text box will be blank. And that was worse than choosing the first product. And so that's why we're choosing the first product. And by setting the first product, a row is being created now. And that then means that the text box can show its text.
And he did indicate that he gets that now. So related to that same combo box issues, Colin comments that if the product category is changed, he thinks it would be better to clear the cascaded combo box item rather than changing it to the corresponding item in the new category. Like if you change it to beverages, if there's a brownie mix or a beer, you know.
And I think he's right because at this point, the row does exist. So my previous spiel about, well, I kind of have to do it is no longer valid. So yes, that would be a further optimization that I think would be possible. Would I choose it? Because now we have two different behaviors that if you change it, the product is blank. Whereas if it is the initial, it is not. I think I would still leave it the way it is. But you may choose differently.
This would be another place you could demonstrate the drop-down feature. So when they pick the first category, the drop-down of the product would automatically drop down.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. I think there are ways to optimize this further. And I'm interested to see if in the next several months people come up with, hey, Tom, or team, I should say. This is not just me. How about this? And actually someone, when we will speak about that in August or so, has already made an excellent suggestion with regards to error handling. And we are seriously looking at implementing their suggestion.
Related as well, Robert asks if on the combo boxes, why the separate text fields versus using column widths to bind to column 1 but display column 2. Does that make sense to you? I'm not sure I'm following that question.
Yeah, it does. I haven't researched that in depth. I'd be interested to see if there is an implementation. I did research cascading combo boxes quite extensively and found at least half a dozen people from our community who have over the years commented about it, published about it, written about it, and I've downloaded and studied every one of their examples. I found some of them have issues, just like maybe this one does. And this was the best as a team we could come up with. If there is something, I know exactly what you're talking about, sleight of hand that you can do with binding to different columns or showing or hiding different columns. I'd be interested to see a real implementation of that if you are adventurous enough to try it.
We got several nice comments about very nicely done, et cetera, et cetera. George has commented that you guys would love to see contributions based on suggestions from other developers. So please, if you're inspired to offer your enhancements, you guys' work is done.
Okay. That's wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you both, and George as well for coming. Colin, for your insights into the upcoming presentation. And we look forward to listening to that as well here in a week and a few days, right? A week and a day, maybe?
Sounds good.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
everybody.
Crystal. Bye.
Bye now.